Baby found a German shepherd buried under a collapsed building. What Baby did next left everyone in tears. What you're about to listen to will shock you to your core. This incredible story of a 5-year-old boy and a buried German shepherd will leave you in tears. Like, share, and comment below to let us know where you're watching from. The ground shook like an angry beast. Screams filled the air. And then, silence. It was 6:17 a.m. when the first tremor hit Braywood. The small town nestled between rolling hills had never experienced anything like it before. The earth roared and buildings swayed. Glass shattered, concrete crumbled. Lives changed forever. In apartment 4, B of Pine View Residences, 5-year-old Theo Miller was still asleep when his bedroom ceiling began to crack. Plaster dust rained down on his dinosaur-covered blanket. The rumble grew louder, like a monster awakening beneath the town. "Theo!" His mother Claire's scream cut through the noise. She burst into his room, her face pale with terror. "Get under the bed! Now!" Theo's tiny heart hammered against his ribs. His mother's fear was a tangible thing, something he'd never felt before. He slid from the bed and crawled underneath, just as a massive crack split his ceiling in two. Claire dove beside him, wrapping her body around his small frame as the world collapsed around them. The deafening roar drowned out her whispered prayers. Theo squeezed his eyes shut, his small fingers digging into his mother's arm. The shaking seemed to last forever. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds of pure terror as their world fell apart. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence afterward was almost as frightening as the noise. Dust hung in the air, making it hard to breathe. Theo coughed, his eyes stinging. "Mommy?" he whispered. Claire's arms trembled around him. "I'm here, baby. Don't move yet." From somewhere in the building, a child began to wail. The sound broke the spell of silence, and soon more voices joined. Cries for help, shouts of names, the beginning of chaos. "Daniel!" Claire called out, her voice cracking. "Daniel, can you hear me?" Theo's father had left for work early the morning. He was a paramedic at Braywood General Hospital, just 3 blocks away. There was no answer. Claire carefully pulled Theo from under the bed. "We need to get out, sweetie. Stay close to me." The apartment they'd called home for 3 years was unrecognizable. The living room wall had partially collapsed, exposing pipes and wiring. Their kitchen was gone, simply gone, with only a jagged edge of floor marking where it had been. The front door hung at an odd angle, jammed shut by the shifted frame. "This way," Claire said, pulling Theo toward the fire escape window. Her hands shook as she tried to force it open. "Please, please," she muttered, pushing harder against the stuck frame. With a groan of metal, it finally gave way. The cool morning air rushed in, carrying with it the sounds of sirens and distant screams. "Careful now," Claire said, helping Theo onto the fire escape. The metal structure groaned under their weight, but held firm. They made their way down slowly, past broken windows and shocked faces of neighbors doing the same. When they finally reached the ground, the true scale of the disaster became clear. Pineview Residences still stood, though badly damaged, but the apartment building across the street had completely collapsed into a mountain of rubble. Cars lay crushed beneath fallen power lines. A fire hydrant had burst, sending water shooting 20 feet into the air. People wandered around in shock, some bleeding, others searching desperately for loved ones. Emergency vehicles struggled to navigate streets blocked by debris. "Daniel," Claire whispered, her eyes scanning the chaos. "We need to find Daddy." She clutched Theo's hand tightly as they made their way through the disaster zone. Every few steps, Claire stopped to call Daniel's name, her voice growing more frantic with each unanswered call. They had walked 2 blocks when Theo spotted him. "Daddy!" he shouted, pointing toward a group of people gathered around an ambulance. Daniel Miller looked up at the sound of his son's voice. His uniform was covered in dust and what looked like blood, but he was alive. His face crumpled with relief as he ran toward them. "Thank God," he said, gathering them both in his arms. "I couldn't reach you? The phones are down, and His voice broke. "Are you hurt? Either of you?" Claire shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "We're okay. The apartment is damaged, but we got out." Daniel knelt down to Theo's level, checking him for injuries. "You're being so brave, buddy. How are you feeling?" Theo didn't answer. His attention had shifted to something behind his father, a pile of rubble where the neighborhood daycare center once stood. Something about it pulled at him, made his skin feel strange and tingly. "Theo?" Daniel squeezed his shoulder gently. "Are you okay?" The boy nodded absently, his eyes still fixed on the collapsed building. "Someone's crying," he said quietly. Daniel turned to look. "Where, buddy?" "Under there." Theo pointed at the mountain of broken concrete and twisted metal. "I can hear them." Daniel exchanged a worried glance with Claire. "There are rescue teams checking all the buildings, Theo. They'll find anyone who's trapped." But Theo wasn't listening. He pulled away from his parents and took a step toward the rubble. "Theo, no!" Claire grabbed for him, but he slipped from her grasp. "They're calling me," Theo said, his voice oddly calm as he walked toward the collapsed building. Daniel quickly caught up to him, taking his hand firmly. "Buddy, it's dangerous. We need to let the rescue workers do their job." Theo looked up at his father, his eyes wide and serious. "But they don't hear it. I do." A rescue worker in an orange vest approached them. "Sir, ma'am, you need to move to the evacuation zone. This area isn't safe." "My son thinks he hears someone in that building," Daniel explained, gesturing toward the rubble. The worker's expression softened as he looked at Theo. "We've already done an initial sweep with sound equipment, little guy. There's no one responding in there." "But," Theo began. "I know it's scary," the worker continued, "but sometimes our minds play tricks on us during emergencies. The building was empty when it collapsed. It was too early for the daycare to be open." Theo shook his head stubbornly. "Someone is there. I can hear them." The worker sighed, clearly used to dealing with traumatized children. "Tell you what, we'll do another sweep in a bit, okay? But right now, you and your family need to go to the safe zone." Daniel nodded gratefully. "Thank you." He turned to Theo. "Let's go, buddy. We need to get somewhere safe." But as they walked away, Theo kept looking back over his shoulder. Something was pulling him toward that pile of rubble. Something important. At the evacuation center, Braywood High School's gymnasium, hundreds of displaced residents gathered. Volunteers handed out bottled water and blankets. Medical staff treated injuries ranging from minor cuts to broken bones. Daniel, being a paramedic, was quickly recruited to help. "I need to assist," he told Claire, glancing at the growing number of injured. "Will you two be okay?" Claire nodded. "Go, we'll be fine." They found a spot in the corner of the gym where Claire sat down heavily on a cot, the adrenaline finally wearing off. Theo stood beside her, strangely quiet, his eyes distant. "Are you hungry, sweetie?" Claire asked, trying to distract him from the trauma they had just experienced. "I think they're handing out snacks by the entrance." Theo shook his head. The crying got quieter, he whispered. Claire pulled him into a hug. "It's okay to be scared, Theo. What happened was very frightening." "Not scared," Theo said, pushing away from her embrace. "Someone needs help. They're still crying." Claire frowned. "Honey, there's no one crying here." "Not here," Theo insisted. "Back there, under the broken building. They're getting tired. Their voices getting smaller." A chill ran down Claire's spine. There was something unsettling about the way Theo spoke, with such certainty, as if he really could hear something no one else could. "The rescue teams are checking all the buildings," she assured him. "If someone is trapped, they'll find them." Theo stared at her with those big, serious eyes of his. "They won't," he said simply. "They don't hear it." For the next hour, Claire tried to get Theo to rest, to eat something, to talk about anything else. But he grew increasingly agitated, pacing back and forth, his small face set in a determined frown. Daniel returned briefly to check on them. "How's he doing?" he asked Claire quietly. "He's fixated on this idea that someone is trapped in that building," she whispered. "I don't know how to distract him." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his dust-covered hair. "It's just the trauma. Kids process these things differently than adults." As they spoke, they failed to notice Theo slipping away. It wasn't until Claire turned around that she realized he was gone. "Theo!" she called, panic rising in her voice. "Theo!" They searched the gymnasium, asking volunteers and other families if they'd seen a small boy with brown hair and dinosaur pajamas. No one had. "Oh, God," Claire whispered, her hand over her mouth. "You don't think he went back there, do you?" Daniel's face paled. "I'll go look. You stay here in case he comes back." He ran from the school, his heart pounding with fear. The streets were chaos, emergency vehicles, debris, dazed survivors. He pushed through it all, heading toward the collapsed daycare center. From a block away, he spotted a small figure climbing over the police tape that cordoned off the area. Theo. "Theo!" Daniel shouted, breaking into a sprint. "Stop!" But Theo had already reached the pile of rubble. To Daniel's horror, his son began pulling at the debris with his bare hands. Daniel reached him just as a section of concrete shifted dangerously. He grabbed Theo, pulling him back just in time as more debris slid down the pile. "What are you doing?" Daniel demanded, his voice sharp with fear. "You could have been hurt." Tears filled Theo's eyes. "But they're still crying, Daddy. They need help." "There's no one there, Theo," Daniel said firmly. The rescue teams checked. "They're wrong," Theo shouted, struggling against his father's grip. "I can hear it. Why won't anyone listen to me?" A rescue worker jogged over to them. "Sir, you can't be here. It's not stable." "I'm sorry," Daniel said, still holding on to his struggling son. He ran off from the evacuation center. He thinks he hears someone trapped. The worker, a woman with kind eyes and a weary face, looked at Theo. "What do you hear, little one?" Theo stopped struggling. "Crying," he said softly, "and scratching, like ... He made a weak pawing motion with his hand. "Like this." The woman exchanged a glance with Daniel. "We did a thorough check with audio equipment. There were no human sounds detected." "Not human," Theo said suddenly, his eyes wide. "Different." Daniel felt a chill run through him. "What do you mean, not human?" "The crying is different," Theo insisted. "Please, can you just listen? Really listen?" The rescue worker hesitated, then sighed. It would be irresponsible not to check. She pressed the button on her radio. "Jackson, bring the audio equipment back to Sector 4. We're doing another sweep." Another worker arrived with a sensitive listening device. He placed the headphones over his ears and extended the microphone toward different sections of the rubble. "Nothing," he reported after a few minutes. "Not picking up any sounds." "There." Theo pointed to a specific spot near what might have been the entrance to the daycare. "Try there." The worker humored him, moving the microphone to where Theo indicated. After a moment, his expression changed. "Wait, I've got something. Very faint, but..." He adjusted some settings on the device. "It could be movement, not voice, but..." Another worker joined them, bringing additional equipment. They focused on the area Theo had pointed out, scanning with heat sensors. "I'm getting a reading," the second worker said, surprise evident in his voice. "Very weak, but there's definitely something alive in there." Within minutes, more rescue personnel arrived. They carefully began removing debris from the area, setting up supports to prevent further collapse. Theo watched intently, refusing to leave despite Daniel's attempts to take him back to Claire. "I need to stay," he insisted. "They're scared." After nearly an hour of careful excavation, one of the workers shouted, "I see something!" They cleared away more rubble, revealing a small pocket in the debris, and there, barely visible in the dim space, was a patch of dirty, matted fur. "It's a dog," someone said. Theo pushed forward. I told you someone was crying." The rescue continued more urgently now. As they removed the last pieces of concrete, a German shepherd puppy came into view. It was covered in dust, its fur caked with blood. One of its legs was clearly broken, and it lay almost motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of its chest. "He's still alive," a rescue worker confirmed, reaching in carefully to assess the animal. "But barely. Must have been trapped since the quake hit." Theo broke free from his father's grip and rushed forward. "Be careful," he pleaded with the workers. "He's hurt bad." The rescuers gently lifted the dog from its prison of rubble. Its eyes were closed, its breathing labored. "We need to get him to a vet," one of the workers said. "There's a mobile animal clinic set up near the high school." As they placed the dog on a makeshift stretcher, its eyes flickered open for just a moment. Those pain-filled eyes found Theo's, and something passed between them, a connection that silenced everyone watching. Theo reached out a small, dust-covered hand and gently touched the dog's muzzle. "I found you," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. The dog's tail moved, just once. A weak, fragile movement. But it was enough. Claire had arrived by then, having followed the commotion. She gasped when she saw the scene. "How did he know?" she whispered to Daniel. "How could he possibly have known that dog was there?" Daniel shook his head, unable to answer. They watched as their son walked alongside the stretcher, refusing to leave the dog's side. "He needs me," Theo said simply when Claire tried to pull him away. His small face was streaked with tears and dirt, but his eyes burned with determination. As they loaded the dog into a vehicle, one of the rescue workers turned to Theo. "You saved this dog's life, young man. The heat sensors might never have picked up such a weak signal if we hadn't been looking exactly where you told us to. If we'd waited any longer..." The worker didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew what would have happened. "How did you hear him, Theo?" Claire asked as they followed the animal rescue vehicle. No one else could hear anything. Theo looked up at his mother, his expression serious beyond his years. "He was calling me, Mommy. He knew I would come." The mobile animal clinic was a converted RV, parked at the edge of the high school grounds. The space inside was cramped but efficient, with basic medical equipment and supplies. A veterinarian with gray-streaked hair and tired eyes examined the German Shepherd puppy, while Theo and his parents watched anxiously from the doorway. "Will he be okay?" Theo asked, his voice small and trembling. The vet, Dr. Morris according to her name tag, glanced up with a carefully neutral expression. "He's in rough shape, little man. Dehydrated, malnourished, and that leg is definitely broken. He's also got some internal injuries I'm concerned about." Theo's lower lip quivered. "But you can fix him, right?" Dr. Morris sighed, checking the puppy's pulse again. "I'm going to do everything I can. He's young, and that's in his favor. But I need to be honest, he's very weak." Claire placed her hands on Theo's shoulders. "The doctor needs space to work, sweetie. Let's wait outside." "No!" Theo pulled away, his eyes never leaving the dog. "I need to stay with him. He'll be scared without me." Daniel knelt beside his son. "Theo, buddy, we need to let Dr. Morris help him. We can wait right outside and check back soon." Theo shook his head stubbornly. "He needs me." His voice dropped to a whisper. "He told me so." Claire and Daniel exchanged concerned glances over their son's head. This fixation wasn't normal, even considering the trauma they'd all experienced. Dr. Morris studied Theo for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Actually, having someone he trusts nearby might help keep him calm. Theo can stay, if he promises to stand back and let me work." Theo nodded solemnly. "I promise." "We'll wait outside," Claire said, squeezing Theo's shoulder gently. "Just for a little while, okay?" Once his parents had stepped outside, Theo moved closer to the examination table. The puppy lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. An IV line had been placed in his front leg, delivering fluids to his dehydrated body. "You're being so brave," Theo whispered, carefully placing his small hand near, but not touching, the dog's head. "Just like me when the building fell down. I was really scared too." Dr. Morris worked efficiently around him, cleaning wounds, applying bandages, and preparing a splint for the broken leg. She cast occasional glances at the boy, who stood perfectly still, his eyes never leaving the injured animal. "Have you ever had a dog before?" she asked, trying to distract him from the more distressing aspects of the treatment. Theo shook his head. "Mom's allergic, but she won't be allergic to him." Dr. Morris raised an eyebrow. "Oh? How do you know that?" "Because he belongs with us," Theo said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "His name is Shadow." "Shadow, huh?" Dr. Morris gently cleaned a wound on the dog's side. "Did you read that somewhere? On his collar, maybe?" Theo frowned slightly. It's just his name." Before Dr. Morris could respond, the puppy's eyes flickered open. They were a striking amber color, clouded with pain, but unmistakably alert. His gaze landed on Theo, and his tail twitched weakly against the table. "Hey, Shadow," Theo said softly, a smile spreading across his face. "You're gonna be okay now." Dr. Morris watched in astonishment as the dog's breathing steadied. She'd been treating animals for over 20 years, and she'd never seen such an immediate response, especially not from an animal as severely injured as this one. "You two have quite a connection," she said, adjusting the splint on Shadow's leg. "We're supposed to be together," Theo replied, reaching out to gently stroke the fur between Shadow's ears. "That's why I heard him when nobody else could." Outside the RV, Claire and Daniel waited anxiously. The evacuation center was a hive of activity as more survivors arrived and emergency services worked to establish order in the chaos. "I'm worried about him," Claire said, hugging herself against the cool morning air. There was something unsettling about her son's certainty, something that went beyond a child's imagination or wishful thinking. Dr. Morris returned later that afternoon with good news. "Shadow's stable enough to be moved now? Your husband has arranged a corner for you at the evacuation center where you can keep him." Theo's face lit up. "See, Mommy, I told you he was coming with us." They carefully transported Shadow to the high school gym, where Daniel had indeed secured a small semi-private area using room dividers. He'd obtained a dog bed from somewhere, probably donated by a local pet store, and had set it up next to a cot for Theo. The rescue workers told everyone about how Theo found Shadow. Daniel explained quietly to Claire. People were happy to help. That night, as hundreds of displaced residents attempted to sleep in the crowded gymnasium, Theo lay on his cot with one arm extended down, his hand resting on Shadow's back. The puppy had eaten a small amount of soft food and had taken his medication without protest when Theo administered it exactly as Dr. Morris had shown him. Claire watched her son from her own cot, worried about his intense attachment to the dog, but also touched by his compassion and determination. She'd never seen him so focused, so sure of himself. "He's a good kid," Daniel whispered, following her gaze. "Maybe this is his way of finding something positive in all this chaos." "Maybe," Claire agreed, though her unease remained. "But I've never seen him like this before. It's like he and that dog have some kind of connection." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Let's just be grateful he's coping. Many children are having a much harder time processing what happened." Claire nodded, trying to push away her concerns. Daniel was right. Compared to the screaming nightmares and catatonic silence some children were experiencing, Theo's fixation on Shadow seemed relatively harmless. As the emergency lights dimmed in the gymnasium, Claire finally drifted into an exhausted sleep. She didn't notice when Theo slipped from his cot to lie beside Shadow, whispering into the dog's ear, their foreheads touching in the darkness. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as emergency services worked to assess the damage throughout Braywood and begin the recovery process. Families huddled around phones and radios, desperate for information about their homes and workplaces. Claire woke to find Theo already awake, carefully giving Shadow water from a small bowl. The puppy looked marginally better, more alert, his eyes tracking Theo's movements with obvious affection. "Good morning," Claire said, sitting up stiffly on the uncomfortable cot. "How's Shadow doing?" "Better," Theo replied. "His leg still hurts a lot, but he's not as scared anymore." Daniel appeared with breakfast, granola bars and fruit cups donated by a local grocery store. "I spoke with the building inspector. They'll be checking our apartment building today to see if it's safe to return." "What if it's not?" Claire asked, keeping her voice low so Theo wouldn't worry. "The Red Cross is setting up temporary housing in the community center," Daniel said. "We can stay there until we figure something out." He glanced at Shadow. "They allow pets, too." Theo, who had been listening despite their attempts to speak quietly, smiled triumphantly. "See? Shadow's supposed to be with us." After breakfast, Dr. Morris came to check on Shadow. She seemed pleased with his progress, changing his bandages and adjusting his splint. "He's a fighter," she told them, "and having Theo near seems to help enormously. I've never seen an animal respond to someone like this before." As she examined Shadow's collar, which had been cleaned of dirt and blood, she frowned slightly. "There's a tag here, but it's scratched so badly I can't read it. And look at this." She pointed to a scar running down Shadow's front leg. "This is an old injury, completely healed. He's had quite a life already for such a young dog." Theo nodded solemnly. "He has lots of stories to tell." Dr. Morris smiled at him. "I'm sure he does." She patted Shadow's head gently. "I'll be back to check on him this evening. Keep giving him water, but no solid food yet. Just the soft food I left for him." As the day progressed, Claire noticed something strange. People kept stopping by their little corner of the gym, offering help, bringing supplies for Shadow, asking Theo about how he'd found the dog. The story had spread throughout the evacuation center and beyond. The miraculous tale of a 5-year-old boy who had somehow heard an injured puppy buried under tons of rubble when sophisticated rescue equipment had detected nothing. "It's remarkable," one volunteer said. "That dog would have died if not for your son. How did he know?" Claire had no answer for that. The question had been haunting her since the moment Theo had first insisted he heard something under the collapsed building. That afternoon, as Shadow slept, Theo sat cross-legged beside him, drawing with crayons someone had given him. He was unusually quiet, concentrating intently on his artwork. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" Claire asked, peering over his shoulder. The paper showed a crude but recognizable German shepherd puppy, but behind it was a strange shape, a figure that looked almost human, but not quite. Something about it made Claire's skin prickle uncomfortably. "That's Shadow," Theo explained, pointing to the dog. "And that's his friend." "His friend?" Claire asked cautiously. "What friend?" Theo shrugged. "The one who was with him under the building. The one who told me where to find Shadow." Claire felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Someone else was trapped with Shadow? Theo shook his head. Not trapped, just there. He returned to his drawing, adding more details to the strange figure. Claire glanced at Shadow, who was sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She wanted to dismiss Theo's words as imagination, a child's way of processing trauma, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something truly inexplicable had happened. She was still pondering this when Daniel returned with news. "They've checked our building," he said. "The structure is sound, but there's significant damage to the east wing, including our apartment. We can go back tomorrow to collect whatever belongings we can salvage, but we can't stay there." Claire nodded, having expected as much. "What about the community center housing?" "Already full," Daniel said grimly. "But my colleague Jeff offered us his guest room. His house is on the other side of town. No damage there." "That's very kind of him," Claire said, relieved. Daniel hesitated. "There's one thing, though. Jeff is severely allergic to dogs. We can't bring Shadow." Theo's head snapped up at this. "Shadow comes with us," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "He needs to be with me." Claire and Daniel exchanged helpless glances. After everything that had happened, how could they separate Theo from the dog he had miraculously found and saved? Dr. Morris mentioned the animal shelter is setting up a temporary facility for displaced pets, Daniel suggested gently. Shadow would get excellent care there, and we could visit him every day until we find a permanent place to live. "No." Theo's voice was quiet but resolute. "Shadow stays with me. Always." There was something in his tone, a certainty beyond his years, that silenced both parents. It was the same unnerving certainty with which he'd insisted someone was crying under the rubble when no one else had heard a sound. Claire knelt beside her son. "Theo, honey, we don't have a choice right now. We need somewhere to stay, and Jeff's house is our best option. Shadow will be well taken care of at the shelter, and we'll visit him every day. I promise." Theo looked at her, his eyes filled with a wisdom that didn't belong in a child so young. "You don't understand," he said softly. "Shadow and I are supposed to be together. He told me so." "Who told you?" Claire asked, that uneasy feeling returning. Theo didn't answer directly. Instead, he placed his small hand on Shadow's head, and the puppy's eyes opened immediately, as if responding to a silent call. Their gazes locked in that strange, intense way that had been happening since they had first found each other. "He knows things," Theo whispered, still looking into Shadow's amber eyes. "Important things. That's why he was saved. That's why I heard him when no one else could." The discussion about where to stay was interrupted when Dr. Morris returned with evening medications for Shadow. She sensed the tension immediately. "Everything okay here?" she asked, kneeling to check Shadow's splint. Daniel explained their housing dilemma, emphasizing the impossibility of bringing Shadow to his colleague's home. Dr. Morris listened thoughtfully, then offered, "I might have a solution. My sister runs a small bed and breakfast on the edge of town. It wasn't damaged in the quake, and she's opened it up to displaced families. She loves dogs." She smiled at Theo. "I could make a call if you'd like." The relief on Claire and Daniel's faces was immediate. "That would be wonderful," Claire said. "If it's not too much trouble?" "Not at all. Let me step outside and call her now." As Dr. Morris left to make the call, Daniel squeezed Claire's hand. "That's lucky," he whispered. Claire nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that luck had little to do with anything that had happened since the earthquake struck. That night, they settled into a cozy room at Willow Creek Bed and Breakfast, a charming Victorian house surrounded by oak trees. Nancy, Dr. Morris's sister, had welcomed them warmly, making a special fuss over Shadow and setting up a comfortable bed for him in their room. "Such a beautiful dog," she'd said, gently stroking his head. "And quite the little hero you have there. She'd smiled at Theo. "My sister told me how you found him when no one else could." Theo had simply nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her knowledge of their story. Now, as moonlight filtered through lace curtains, Claire watched her son sleep. He'd insisted on having his cot placed right next to Shadow's bed, and one small hand dangled down, resting on the puppy's back even in sleep. They breathed in perfect synchronicity, their chests rising and falling as one. "It's uncanny," Claire whispered to Daniel, who sat on the edge of their bed, checking messages on the emergency phone he'd been issued. "The way they're connected, it's like they've known each other forever." Daniel looked up, his expression troubled. "Claire, there's something I need to tell you. One of the rescue workers mentioned something strange today." He hesitated. "They found out that the daycare center wasn't completely empty when it collapsed." Claire's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "They said no one was there. The building owner was inside, doing some early morning maintenance. Gabriel Hartman. He's still missing, presumed." Daniel didn't finish the sentence. "That's terrible," Claire said. "But what does that have to do with—" "Gabriel Hartman was a retired firefighter," Daniel continued. "And according to his neighbors, he had a German Shepherd puppy, a puppy he was training as a search and rescue dog." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "Are you saying—" Daniel nodded grimly. "I think Shadow belonged to this man, the one who's still missing." They both turned to look at their sleeping son and the dog he'd miraculously found buried beneath a collapsed building. The dog he'd somehow heard crying when sophisticated rescue equipment had detected nothing. "We should tell the authorities," Claire said finally. "If Shadow belongs to this man—" "I already did," Daniel replied. "They're adding it to their search parameters. But Claire ... He lowered his voice further. "The chance of finding anyone alive after nearly 2 days under that rubble is almost zero." Claire nodded, understanding the implication. If Gabriel Hartman was confirmed dead, Shadow would officially be without an owner. The thought should have been comforting. It would resolve the question of whether they could keep the dog that Theo had become so attached to. Instead, it filled her with an inexplicable dread. "We should try to get some sleep," Daniel said, crawling into bed beside her. "Tomorrow will be another long day." But sleep eluded Claire. She lay awake for hours, watching Theo and Shadow, wondering about the strange connection between them, and thinking about the missing firefighter who might be lying somewhere in the ruins of Braywood. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were troubled, filled with falling buildings, crying voices, and shadowy figures just beyond her vision. She woke with a start just before dawn. Something had jolted her from sleep, a noise, a movement. She wasn't sure. The room was dimly lit by the first hint of sunrise through the curtains. Shadow was sitting up in his bed, ears perked forward, body tense. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Not threatening, but alert, warning. "Shadow?" Claire whispered, not wanting to wake Daniel or Theo. "What is it, boy?" The puppy didn't acknowledge her. His attention was fixed on the window, his entire body rigid with attention. Theo stirred, his eyes opening immediately, as if someone had called his name. Without a word, he sat up and placed his hand on Shadow's back. "Theo?" Claire asked, now thoroughly unsettled. "What's wrong?" "We need to move," Theo said, his voice eerily calm. "Right now." Before Claire could respond, Shadow barked once, sharp and urgent. In that same moment, she felt it. A subtle vibration running through the floor, growing stronger by the second. "Daniel!" she cried, shaking her husband awake. "Aftershock!" Daniel was instantly alert, years of emergency response training kicking in. "Under the door frame," he ordered, grabbing Theo while Claire scooped up Shadow, ignoring the puppy's yelp of pain as his broken leg was jostled. They barely made it to the doorway when the aftershock hit, not as powerful as the original earthquake, but strong enough to rattle the windows and send a decorative plate crashing from the wall. It lasted only seconds, but those seconds stretched into an eternity of terror as the house groaned around them. When it finally stopped, they heard Nancy calling from downstairs, checking if everyone was all right. Other guests responded shakily from their rooms. "How did you know?" Claire asked Theo, still clutching Shadow to her chest. "How did you know it was coming?" Theo stroked Shadow's head gently. "Shadow told me," he said simply. Daniel and Claire exchanged concerned glances over their son's head. This was beyond a child's imagination or a strange coincidence. Shadow had sensed the aftershock coming, and somehow, impossibly, Theo had understood. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. The aftershock had caused minimal additional damage to Braywood, but it had rattled already traumatized residents. The emergency response teams were stretched thin again, and Daniel was called in to help. "I have to go," he told Claire apologetically. "Will you two be okay here with Shadow?" Claire nodded, though the morning's events had left her deeply shaken. "We'll be fine. Nancy said we're welcome to stay in the dining room as long as we need to." Daniel knelt to Theo's level. "Be good for Mom, okay, buddy? And take good care of Shadow." Theo nodded solemnly. "I will. Be careful, Daddy." After Daniel left, Claire took Theo and Shadow downstairs to the dining room, where Nancy had set up a breakfast buffet for her guests. The room buzzed with conversation about the aftershock, theories about whether more were coming, and stories about the ongoing rescue and recovery efforts. Theo sat quietly at a corner table, feeding small pieces of scrambled egg to Shadow, who ate delicately from his hand. The puppy seemed stronger today, his eyes brighter, though he still couldn't put weight on his broken leg. A middle-aged couple at the next table watched them with smiles. "Is that the miracle dog we've been hearing about?" the woman asked Claire. "The one that little boy found under the daycare center?" News traveled fast in a crisis. Claire nodded. "Yes, this is Shadow." "Amazing story," the man said. "Everyone's talking about it. How the rescue equipment didn't pick up anything, but your son insisted he heard the dog crying." Claire smiled tightly, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding people's need for uplifting stories amid the disaster. The conversation was interrupted when Nancy approached their table with a concerned expression. "Claire, there's someone here to see you. A police officer." Claire's heart sank. Had they found Gabriel Hartman? Was this about Shadow's ownership? Officer Martinez was a petite woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She introduced herself, then glanced at Theo. "Is there somewhere we could talk privately?" "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of my son," Claire replied, instinctively placing a protective hand on Theo's shoulder. Officer Martinez nodded, pulling up a chair. "I understand your family found a German Shepherd puppy in the collapsed daycare center." "That's right. My son heard him crying under the rubble." The officer's expression revealed nothing. "We have reason to believe the dog belonged to Gabriel Hartman, the building owner who is still missing." Theo's head snapped up at the name. Shadow, who had been dozing at his feet, suddenly sat alert, eyes fixed on the officer. Yes, my husband mentioned that possibility," Claire said carefully. "We'd like to use the dog in our search efforts," Officer Martinez continued. "Dogs often have strong bonds with their owners. He might be able to lead us to Mr. Hartman if—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. If Gabriel was still alive. Claire glanced at Theo, whose face had gone very still. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. Shadow was badly injured. He has a broken leg, and he won't have to walk much," Officer Martinez assured her. "We'd carry him most of the way. We just need him to help us narrow down the search area." Before Claire could respond, Theo spoke up. "Shadow knows where he is." Both women turned to look at him. "What did you say, honey?" Claire asked. "Shadow knows where his person is," Theo repeated. "He told me last night." Officer Martinez clearly didn't know how to respond to this. She looked to Claire for explanation. "Theo has a very active imagination," Claire said weakly, though she was beginning to doubt this explanation herself. "Can you find him?" Officer Martinez asked Theo directly, her voice gentle but serious. "Can Shadow help us find Mr. Hartman?" Theo nodded without hesitation. "Yes, but you have to be quick. He doesn't have much air left." A chill ran down Claire's spine. The certainty in her son's voice was unnerving, the same certainty with which he'd announced the coming aftershock just hours earlier. "I'll need to call your husband," Officer Martinez said to Claire. "If you're agreeable, we'd like to try this as soon as possible." Claire wanted to refuse. Every maternal instinct screamed against involving her 5-year-old son in a rescue operation that might end in tragedy. But the memory of Theo's face as he'd insisted someone was crying beneath the rubble, when everyone else had heard nothing, stopped her. What if Gabriel Hartman was still alive? What if Theo and Shadow could save him, just as Theo had saved Shadow? "All right," she said finally. "But I'm coming with you, and if at any point I feel it's too dangerous or too upsetting for Theo, we're leaving immediately." Officer Martinez agreed to these terms and stepped outside to make arrangements. Claire knelt beside Theo, searching his face for any sign of fear or uncertainty. "Theo, are you sure about this? It might be scary, and Shadow might not actually be able to find his owner." Theo met her gaze steadily. "He's not afraid, Mom. Neither am I." "How do you know where Mr. Hartman is?" Claire asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "Did someone tell you?" Theo stroked Shadow's head gently. "Shadow showed me in my dream. He's under the biggest pile of stones, where the special room was." "Special room?" Claire repeated. "Where Shadow learned to find people," Theo explained patiently, as if it were obvious. "His person taught him there." Before Claire could ask any more questions, Officer Martinez returned. "We're ready when you are. We have transport waiting outside." The trip back to the disaster zone was tense. Claire held Shadow carefully in her lap, while Theo sat beside her in the police SUV. Dr. Morris had insisted on coming along to monitor Shadow's condition, and she sat silently in the front passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at the puppy with professional concern. The collapsed daycare center was still cordoned off, but a team of rescue workers waited for them, along with what appeared to be the incident commander and several other officers. As they approached the ruins, Shadow grew increasingly alert. His ears perked forward, and despite his injuries, his body tensed as if ready to spring into action. The incident commander, a burly man named Chief Reynolds, greeted them with barely concealed skepticism. "Mrs. Miller, we appreciate your willingness to assist, but I want to be clear, this is highly unorthodox." "I understand," Claire replied, "but my son is convinced Shadow can help find Mr. Hartman." Chief Reynolds knelt to Theo's level. "Son, I need you to understand something. We've been searching for Mr. Hartman for almost 3 days now. The chances of finding him alive are—" He hesitated, clearly trying to find age-appropriate words. "They're not very good." Theo met the chief's gaze without flinching. "He's alive. He's been saving his air." The adults exchanged glances, a mixture of pity and discomfort. No one wanted to crush a child's hope, especially not one who had already experienced such trauma. "All right then," Chief Reynolds said, standing up. "Here's how we'll do this. Officer Jackson will carry the dog along the perimeter of the site. If he shows any interest in a particular area, we'll investigate further." Claire expected Theo to protest, to insist that Shadow knew exactly where to go. Instead, her son nodded calmly. "That's okay. Shadow will tell Officer Jackson where to go." The search began with Officer Jackson, a tall man with gentle hands, carefully lifting Shadow and walking slowly around the ruins. Theo insisted on walking alongside them, one hand resting on Shadow's back. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Shadow remained alert, but gave no indication of detecting anything unusual. Chief Reynolds was beginning to look impatient, and Claire could tell he was about to call off the attempt. Then, as they reached the southeast corner of the rubble pile, Shadow suddenly stiffened. A low whine escaped his throat, and he began to squirm in Officer Jackson's arms. "Here," Theo said confidently. "He's under here." Chief Reynolds frowned. "We've already searched this quadrant thoroughly. There were no signs of life." Shadow barked, a sharp, insistent sound that made everyone jump. He struggled harder, clearly wanting to be put down. "I think he's trying to tell us something," Officer Jackson said, looking uncertainly at the chief. Chief Reynolds sighed. "Bring the sound equipment over here. Let's check again." A technician approached with sensitive listening devices. He placed headphones over his ears and extended a microphone toward the area Shadow had indicated. Everyone watched in tense silence as he adjusted dials and moved the microphone systematically over the rubble. After what seemed like an eternity, the technician froze. He adjusted his headphones, a frown of concentration on his face. "I've got something," he said finally. "Very faint, but it could be tapping." The atmosphere changed instantly. The rescue team sprang into action, setting up equipment to begin carefully removing debris from the area. "You need to step back now," Chief Reynolds told Claire and Theo. "This is going to be a delicate operation." Claire tugged gently at Theo's hand, but he resisted. "I need to stay with Shadow," he insisted. "He's scared." Indeed, Shadow was trembling in Officer Jackson's arms, his eyes fixed on the rubble pile, a continuous low whine coming from his throat. "Please," Theo said, looking up at Chief Reynolds with those unnervingly serious eyes. "Shadow needs to be here when you find his person." Something in the boy's certainty seemed to get through to the chief. He nodded reluctantly. You can stay at the command post. It's a safe distance away, but still within sight of the operation. The dog, too. This compromise seemed to satisfy Theo. He followed Claire to the designated area, where Officer Jackson carefully set Shadow down on a folded emergency blanket. The puppy immediately tried to stand, whimpering when his broken leg wouldn't support him. "It's okay," Theo whispered, sitting beside him and gently holding him still. "They're coming to get him now. You did your job." Hours passed as the rescue team worked meticulously to remove layers of debris without causing further collapse. Claire watched Theo and Shadow, both utterly focused on the operation, neither showing any signs of doubt or impatience. It was nearing sunset when a shout went up from the rescue team. "We've got something!" Everyone at the command post tensed, watching as the workers carefully lifted away a large section of concrete. A few moments later, another shout. "He's alive! We need medical now!" Claire couldn't believe what she was hearing. After nearly 3 days buried under tons of rubble, Gabriel Hartman had been found alive. Shadow heard it too. Despite his injuries, he struggled to his feet, balancing on 3 legs, his entire body quivering with excitement. Theo stood beside him, one hand steady on the dog's back, a small smile on his face. "He did it," Claire whispered, tears filling her eyes. Shadow found him. "I told you," Theo said simply. They belonged together. Within minutes, the rescue team had extracted Gabriel Hartman from his concrete prison. He was placed on a stretcher and rushed toward the waiting ambulance, an oxygen mask covering his face, IVs already running into his arms. As the stretcher passed the command post, Shadow barked, a joyful, triumphant sound. Gabriel's eyes flickered open, searching until they found the source of the bark. When his gaze landed on Shadow, tears immediately welled in his dust-covered eyes. With a trembling hand, he reached out toward the dog. The medical team paused, understanding the importance of this moment. Officer Jackson carefully lifted Shadow and brought him close enough that Gabriel could touch him. The man's fingers weakly tangled in Shadow's fur, and a sob escaped him, despite the oxygen mask. Shadow whined softly, leaning into the touch as much as his injuries would allow. "You saved me," Gabriel whispered, his voice barely audible. "Good boy." The medical team couldn't wait any longer. "We need to get him to the hospital now," one of the paramedics said urgently. The stretcher was loaded into the ambulance, the doors closed, and Gabriel Hartman was rushed away, alive against all odds. As the ambulance disappeared around the corner, a stunned silence fell over the crowd that had gathered to witness the miracle rescue. Then, slowly, applause began, first from a few rescue workers, then spreading until everyone was clapping and cheering. Chief Reynolds looked shell-shocked. He approached Claire and Theo, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, he said. "I've never seen anything like it." He knelt down to Theo's level. "Son, you just helped save a man's life. How did you know?" Theo stroked Shadow's head gently. "I told you. Shadow knew. He just needed someone to listen." The chief glanced at Claire, clearly unsure how to respond to this. "Well, whatever happened here today was extraordinary." He stood up, addressing Claire now. "The hospital will need contact information for the dog. Since Mr. Hartman has no family in the area, they'll want updates on Shadow's condition." "Of course," Claire said, still trying to process everything that had happened. "We'll take good care of him until Mr. Hartman recovers." The ride back to the bed and breakfast was quiet. Theo sat with Shadow in his lap, whispering to the puppy too softly for Claire to hear. Dr. Morris, who had witnessed the entire rescue, kept glancing back at them with a mixture of wonder and scientific curiosity. "In all my years of veterinary practice," she finally said, "I've never seen anything like the connection between your son and that dog. It's as if they can communicate without words." Claire smiled weakly. "Theo has always been intuitive," she said, though this felt woefully inadequate to explain what had happened today. When they arrived at Willow Creek, Nancy was waiting anxiously at the door. "I heard the news on the radio," she said as they walked in. "They're calling it the miracle of Braywood. Everyone's talking about the little boy and his dog who found the firefighter after 3 days." Claire cringed inwardly at his dog. Shadow belonged to Gabriel Hartman, a fact that would become painfully clear to Theo once the excitement of the rescue faded. Daniel was already at the bed and breakfast, having rushed over as soon as he'd heard about the successful rescue. He embraced Claire tightly, then knelt to hug Theo. "I'm so proud of you, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you did today was amazing." Theo accepted the praise with the same calm certainty he'd shown throughout the ordeal. "Shadow did it," he corrected. "I just helped." That night, after Theo had finally fallen asleep, once again with his hand resting on Shadow's back, Claire and Daniel talked in hushed voices by the window. "The news is calling them heroes," Daniel said. "The hospital says it's a miracle Gabriel survived. He had an air pocket and a small water pipe was dripping near him, so he didn't dehydrate completely. But they never would have found him if not for Shadow and Theo." Claire hugged herself, troubled despite the happy outcome. "Daniel, how did Theo know? Not just about Gabriel, but about the aftershock this morning?" Shadow sensed it coming, and somehow Theo understood. She looked at her sleeping son. "It's not normal." Daniel sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "I don't know, Claire. Maybe dogs really can sense earthquakes. There's scientific evidence for that. And maybe Theo is just unusually in tune with Shadow." "It's more than that," Claire insisted. "He keeps saying Shadow tells him things." "And what about that drawing he made, of the friend who was with Shadow under the building?" Daniel had no answer for that. They sat in silence for a while, watching their son sleep beside the dog that had changed their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. "What happens when Gabriel recovers?" Claire finally asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Shadow belongs to him. Theo knows that, but—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Let's not worry about that yet," Daniel said, taking her hand. "One day at a time, okay? Gabriel has a long recovery ahead of him." Claire nodded, though her heart ached at the thought of eventually separating Theo from Shadow. After everything they'd been through together, how could anyone break that bond? That night, while Claire and Daniel slept, Theo had a dream that felt more real than any dream he'd ever experienced. He stood in a white room with no windows or doors. Before him knelt a man in a firefighter's uniform, Gabriel Hartman, his face no longer pale and injured, but strong and kind. "Hello, Theo," the man said, smiling. "Hello," Theo replied, not at all surprised to find himself talking to Shadow's owner in this strange white place. "I need to thank you," Gabriel said, "for finding Shadow, for saving him." "He saved you too," Theo pointed out. Gabriel nodded. "We saved each other. That's what partners do." He reached out, placing a gentle hand on Theo's shoulder. "Shadow is special, you know. More special than most dogs." "I know," Theo said. "He can hear things other people can't, and he can talk without words." "That's right," Gabriel confirmed. "I trained him to find people lost in disasters, but somewhere along the way, we discovered he had gifts I couldn't explain. A sixth sense, you might call it." "Is that why he knew the earthquake was coming?" Theo asked. Gabriel's eyes widened slightly. "He sensed it beforehand?" Theo nodded. "And the aftershock, too. He woke us up just in time." Gabriel looked troubled. "Listen carefully, Theo. Shadow's gifts are rare and precious. He was born to save lives, to help people." "I know," Theo said again. "That's why I heard him when no one else could. He chose me to help." "Yes," Gabriel agreed. "He chose you. Not many would have listened. Not many would have understood." He leaned closer, his expression serious. "Theo, I need to ask you something important. Something only you can do." "What is it?" "Take care of Shadow for me," Gabriel said softly. Theo frowned. "But he's your dog. You're his person." Gabriel smiled sadly. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. Shadow needs someone who understands him, someone who can hear what others can't." Before Theo could ask what he meant, the white room began to fade. Gabriel's image grew transparent, his voice becoming distant. "Shadow will show you the way," were his last words, before Theo woke with a start. The bedroom was dark and quiet. His parents slept soundly in the large bed across the room. Shadow lay beside him, amber eyes open and watchful, as if he'd been waiting for Theo to wake. "You saw him too, didn't you?" Theo whispered. Shadow's tail thumped once against the blanket. Theo placed his small hand on the dog's head. "He asked me to take care of you." Shadow whined softly, pressing his muzzle into Theo's palm. "Don't worry," Theo assured him. "I won't let anyone separate us." The next morning brought news from the hospital. Gabriel Hartman was in critical but stable condition. He had multiple broken bones, internal injuries, and severe dehydration, but doctors were cautiously optimistic about his recovery. "They're calling it a medical miracle," Daniel told Claire as they ate breakfast in the dining room. "No one can believe he survived nearly 3 days under that rubble." Theo sat quietly, feeding Shadow small bites of scrambled egg. The puppy seemed stronger today, even attempting to put weight on his injured leg before Theo gently stopped him. "We should visit Gabriel in the hospital," Theo announced suddenly. "Shadow wants to see him." Claire and Daniel exchanged glances. "Honey, they don't allow dogs in the hospital," Claire explained gently. "They'll let Shadow in," Theo said with absolute certainty. "He's special." Claire sighed, not wanting to argue. "We'll call the hospital and ask, okay? But don't be disappointed if they say no." To everyone's surprise, when Daniel called the hospital, they not only permitted a visit, but encouraged it. "The patient has been asking for his dog," the nurse explained. "The doctors think it might actually help his recovery to see him." And so, that afternoon, they found themselves in the intensive care unit of Braywood General Hospital. Shadow, freshly bathed and with his splint adjusted by doctor. Morris sat calmly in Theo's arms as they were led to Gabriel's room. Gabriel Hartman lay in a hospital bed, connected to various monitors and IV lines. His body was covered in bandages and casts. His face, though bruised, lit up when he saw Shadow and Theo in the doorway. "You came," he whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. Theo approached the bed without hesitation. "Shadow wanted to see you," he said simply. With gentle care, Theo placed Shadow on the edge of the bed. The puppy moved cautiously, mindful of his own injuries, until he was close enough to rest his head on Gabriel's chest. The man lifted a trembling hand to stroke the dog's fur, tears streaming down his face. Claire and Daniel stood back, watching the reunion with mixed emotions. On one hand, it was beautiful to witness the bond between man and dog. On the other, it was a stark reminder that Shadow didn't belong to them, to Theo. After a few minutes of silent communion, Gabriel turned his attention to Theo. "You found him," he said, when no one else could. Theo nodded. "He was calling for help. I heard him." Gabriel studied the boy intently. "Most people wouldn't have. Most people don't listen the way you do." He glanced at Claire and Daniel. "Your son is extraordinary. He has a gift." "We know," Claire said softly, moving closer to the bed. "We just don't understand it." Gabriel smiled weakly. "Some things aren't meant to be understood, just accepted." He returned his gaze to Theo. "Shadow was in the training room when the earthquake hit. I was showing him how to find people trapped under debris. The irony isn't lost on me. The special room Theo had mentioned, where Shadow learned to find people." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. How could Theo have known that? "You trained him as a search and rescue dog?" Daniel asked. Gabriel nodded. "After I retired from active firefighting, I started training dogs for disaster response. Shadow is..." His voice caught. "Shadow is special, more intuitive than any dog I've worked with." "He knew the aftershock was coming," Theo said. "He woke us up just in time." Gabriel didn't look surprised. "He's always been sensitive to things others can't detect." He gazed at Shadow with obvious pride. "He's going to save many lives someday." The nurse appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry, but we need to keep the visit short. Mr. Hartman needs his rest." Theo carefully lifted Shadow from the bed. The puppy whined softly, reluctant to leave his owner. "I'll take good care of him until you're better," Theo promised. Gabriel's expression grew troubled. "Theo, there's something..." He hesitated, glancing at the nurse. "Can you come back tomorrow? There's something important I need to tell you. All of you." The seriousness in his tone concerned Claire, but she nodded. "Of course. We'll come back in the morning." As they left the hospital, she couldn't shake the feeling that Gabriel Hartman knew more than he was telling, about Shadow, about Theo, about the strange connection between them. That night, Theo was unusually quiet. He sat on his cot, stroking Shadow's fur rhythmically as the puppy dozed beside him. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Claire asked, sitting next to him. Theo nodded, though his expression remained solemn. "Shadow is sad. He misses his person." Claire's heart ached. "Of course he does, but Mr. Hartman will get better, and then..." She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence, to tell Theo that Shadow would go back to his rightful owner. "He told me to take care of Shadow," Theo said suddenly. "Who did, honey?" Mr. Hartman? Theo nodded. In my dream last night, he said Shadow chose me because I can hear him when no one else can. Claire hesitated, unsure how to respond. Was it just a child's dream, a manifestation of Theo's desire to keep Shadow? Or was it something more, another inexplicable aspect of whatever mysterious connection existed between her son and this dog? Dreams can seem very real sometimes, she said carefully. Theo looked at her with those unnervingly serious eyes. It wasn't just a dream, Mom. It was a message. Before Claire could respond, Shadow suddenly sat up, ears perked forward, body tense with alertness. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Not again, Claire whispered, remembering the aftershock. But Theo didn't look concerned this time. He hears something different, he explained, placing a calming hand on Shadow's back. Not an earthquake? As if on cue, the phone in their room rang. Daniel, who had been reading in the corner, answered it. Hello? Yes, this is Daniel Miller. His expression changed, growing increasingly concerned as he listened. I see. Yes, we'll come right away. Thank you for calling. He hung up, his face pale. That was the hospital. Gabriel Hartman has taken a turn for the worse. They're taking him into emergency surgery. He looked at Theo and Shadow. He asked to see Shadow before they took him up. He was quite insistent. We need to go now, Theo said, already reaching for Shadow's leash. He's running out of time. The hospital corridor was a flurry of activity when they arrived. A nurse rushed to meet them, looking harried but relieved to see Shadow. Thank goodness you're here. Mr. Hartman refuses to go into surgery until he sees his dog. His blood pressure is dropping, and the doctors are concerned about internal bleeding. They were led to a pre-operative area where Gabriel lay on a gurney, surrounded by medical staff. His face was ashen, his breathing labored. When he saw Shadow, a weak smile crossed his face. There you are, he whispered. Come closer. The medical team reluctantly made space for Theo to approach with Shadow. The boy carefully held the puppy where Gabriel could see and touch him. Sir, a doctor said urgently, we really need to get you to surgery. 1 minute, Gabriel insisted, his voice surprisingly firm despite his condition. He focused on Theo. Remember what I told you? About taking care of him? Theo nodded solemnly. In the white room. Gabriel's eyes widened slightly, then softened with understanding. Yes, in the white room. He stroked Shadow's head one last time. He belongs with you now, Theo. You understand him in ways I never could. He shifted his gaze to Claire and Daniel. There are papers in my desk at home, adoption papers for Shadow. I never filed them because... He coughed weakly. Because I was waiting to find the right family for him. Now I know why. Mr. Hartman, Claire began. You don't need to... Please, Gabriel interrupted. Honor my wish. Shadow chose Theo. That means something important. The doctor stepped forward. We need to go now. Gabriel nodded, his hand falling away from Shadow. Remember, he told Theo, trust what he tells you, always. As the medical team wheeled Gabriel away, Shadow whined softly, pressing closer to Theo. The boy wrapped his arms around the puppy, whispering something into his ear that no one else could hear. A nurse directed them to a waiting area, promising to update them after the surgery. Hours passed in tense silence. Shadow remained unusually alert, his attention fixed on the doors leading to the operating rooms. Shortly after midnight, a surgeon appeared, still wearing his scrubs. His expression told them everything before he spoke a word. I'm very sorry, he said quietly. We did everything we could, but Mr. Hartman's injuries were too severe. He passed away a few minutes ago. Claire gasped, tears filling her eyes. Daniel put his arm around her shoulders, his own eyes glistening. Theo, however, showed no surprise. He simply nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. Shadow, too, remained calm, sad, but not distressed. He knew, Theo whispered to his parents. That's why he wanted to see us, to say goodbye. The surgeon knelt to Theo's level. Your dog meant a lot to Mr. Hartman. He was talking about you both until the very end. Said you were special, both of you. Theo nodded again. We know? In the car on the way back to the bed and breakfast, Claire's thoughts raced. Gabriel's words about adoption papers, about Shadow choosing Theo, about trusting what the dog tells him. It all seemed surreal, yet it aligned perfectly with the inexplicable events of the past few days. "We should check his house," Daniel said quietly as they pulled into the driveway of Willow Creek. "See if those papers really exist." Claire nodded, though part of her was afraid of what else they might find. What other confirmations of the strange connection between her son and this remarkable dog? That night, as Theo slept with Shadow curled against him, Claire stood watching them from the doorway. They breathed in perfect synchrony, their chests rising and falling as one. "What do we do now?" she whispered to Daniel, who stood beside her. He slipped an arm around her waist. "I think Gabriel was right. Shadow belongs with Theo. Whatever connection they have, it's real." "But what does it mean?" Claire pressed. "The dreams, the warnings, the way they communicate without words." Daniel shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe some things aren't meant to be understood, just accepted." He echoed Gabriel's words from earlier that day, words that now seemed prophetic. The morning after Gabriel's passing brought clear skies to Braywood, the first since the earthquake. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains of their room at Willow Creek, casting delicate patterns across the floor. Theo sat on his cot, watching Shadow attempt to stand on all four legs. The puppy was growing stronger each day, his resilience nothing short of remarkable. "Careful," Theo cautioned, as Shadow put tentative weight on his healing leg. "Doctor," Morris said not to rush it. Claire watched her son from the doorway, struck once again by his maturity in the face of all they'd experienced. While other children his age might have been traumatized by the earthquake, the collapsed buildings, and the death they'd witnessed, Theo remained steadfast, grounded by his connection to Shadow in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked, entering the room with a tray of breakfast Nancy had prepared. Theo looked up, his expression serious but calm. Shadow's sad about his person, but he knows he did everything he could to save him. Claire set the tray down on the small table by the window. "And what about you? Are you sad about Mr. Hartman?" Theo considered this, his brow furrowing slightly. "Yes and no. I'm sad he died, but I also know he's okay now." He glanced at Shadow. "He's in the White Room." The White Room again, the place from Theo's dream where he'd spoken with Gabriel. Claire suppressed a shiver. She'd been raised to believe in heaven, in an afterlife, but hearing her 5-year-old speak of it with such certainty was unsettling. Daniel joined them, holding a small cardboard box. "The police just dropped this off. Personal effects from Gabriel's home that he wanted us to have." He set the box on the bed. Apparently he had updated his will recently, naming Theo as Shadow's guardian in case anything happened to him. Claire's eyebrows shot up. "Recently? As in, before the earthquake?" Daniel nodded, looking equally puzzled. 3 weeks ago, according to the officer. He had no family, so he made arrangements for Shadow with a lawyer. Theo didn't seem surprised by this information. He continued gently massaging Shadow's injured leg, a technique Dr. Morris had taught him to help with healing. Claire peered into the box. It contained several folders of paperwork, a leather dog collar that Shadow had presumably outgrown, and a sealed envelope with "For Theo" written on it in neat handwriting. "This is for you, sweetie," she said, handing Theo the envelope. He took it carefully, breaking the seal to reveal a handwritten letter and a small silver key. Shadow immediately perked up at the sight of the key, his tail wagging with sudden excitement. "Would you like me to read it to you?" Claire offered, knowing that while Theo could read some words, a full letter might be beyond his capabilities. Theo shook his head. "I can read it." He unfolded the paper and began to read aloud, his voice slow but clear. "Dear Theo, if you're reading this, it means 2 things. Something has happened to me, and you found Shadow, just as I knew you would. I've had dreams about you for months, a small boy with serious eyes who understands Shadow in ways I never could. At first, I thought they were just dreams, until Shadow started staring out the window every morning toward your part of town, whining softly as if calling to someone. 3 weeks ago, I saw you at the farmer's market. You were holding your mother's hand, but you looked directly at me, directly at Shadow, with recognition in your eyes, though we'd never met. That's when I knew my dreams were more than dreams. They were warnings, preparation for what was to come. The key enclosed opens a safe deposit box at Braywood Community Bank. Inside, you'll find everything I know about Shadow's unusual abilities and the research I've been conducting. It's not much. I was only beginning to understand what makes him special, but it might help you guide him as he grows. Shadow was born to save lives, Theo. That's his purpose. And now, I believe, it's yours too. Listen to him. Trust him. He sees things others can't. Thank you for finding him when I couldn't protect him anymore. In saving him, you've ensured he can go on to save countless others. With gratitude, Gabriel Hartman. A heavy silence fell over the room as Theo finished reading. The letter confirmed what they had all suspected, but had been afraid to fully acknowledge, that whatever connection existed between Theo and Shadow transcended ordinary understanding. He knew, Claire whispered, sinking onto the edge of the bed. Before the earthquake, before any of this happened, he knew you and Shadow would find each other. Theo nodded, carefully folding the letter and returning it to the envelope. That's why Shadow was calling me. He knew too. Daniel sat beside Claire, his expression troubled. Theo, these abilities that Gabriel mentions, the way Shadow senses things, the way you can understand him. Do you know what that means? Theo looked at his father with those serious eyes that suddenly seemed to hold wisdom far beyond his years. It means we're supposed to help people, together. The simplicity of his answer brought tears to Claire's eyes. Whatever strange forces had brought her son and this remarkable dog together, the purpose behind it was pure and good, to save lives, to help others in need. We should go to the bank, Daniel said after a moment. See what Gabriel left in that safe deposit box. The Braywood Community Bank had survived the earthquake with minimal damage. The manager, upon hearing their story, which had by now spread throughout the town, personally escorted them to the safe deposit vault. Mr. Hartman was a regular customer, she explained as she led them through the bank. A quiet man, kept to himself mostly. But he was very specific about this box, said if anything ever happened to him, a boy would come with his key. She left them alone in a small private room with the metal box Gabriel had left for them. Theo inserted the silver key, turning it with a soft click. Inside was a leather-bound journal, several folders of research papers, and a USB drive. Daniel flipped through the journal while Claire examined the folders. They contained articles about animal cognition, intuition, and what scientists called presentiment, the ability to sense or feel events before they occurred. Listen to this, Daniel said, reading from the journal. Day 45 of training. Shadow located the hidden target in under 3 minutes again, though this time